So we're headed for a rematch of 2020, except this time Donald Trump is in the lead because there is a 2020 Biden voter that has now flipped to Donald Trump because of high inflation. The country's on the wrong track. They can't stop these endless wars, whether it's Ukraine or the Middle East. The border's open and crime is on the rise. So the United States, the voters are not being fooled by this. And right now, if the election was tomorrow, Donald Trump would be president.
Now, we've got this latest move by President Trump to try to hang on to that thought that he might have presidential immunity from prosecution in that election interference case. Extraordinarily, despite all of these cases, every time he does appear in court, it just seems to be a further boost to his popularity.
Sure. I mean, the cases, most Americans right now, and to clarify, I do still currently poll for President Trump in his campaign. But most Americans see these prosecutions because they've never been brought before in history against anyone, let alone convict anyone, as political prosecutions. And in our latest poll, which is posted on our website at McLaughlinonline.com, 69% of all voters think these prosecutions are political. And among likely voters, 57% think Biden played a role in bringing these prosecutions. And 54% to 34%, they think there's a double standard of justice in the United States, that President Trump's being prosecuted while Joe Biden and his family are not. And finally, 56 to 36% among all voters, they think that the courts should not decide the election and the voters should. So, so they lack credibility. They lack any precedence in law. I'm not a lawyer, but let me tell you, you can't name anyone who's been convicted under these laws for this kind of prosecution. And Joe Biden is succeeding in making President Trump the Nelson Mandela of America, because in that same poll, like a lot of the media polls right now, Donald Trump is beating Joe Biden 47% to 47% to 43% in the national popular vote. We never saw that in 2016 against Hillary Clinton.
Let me ask you then, let me ask you, John, about the other remarks from Donald Trump, which have caused quite a lot of concern here in the UK and amongst other NATO allies, where he suggested that the US wouldn't necessarily come to the aid of a NATO country that was attacked, which of course is one of the crucial principles of NATO membership. Do you think that was President Trump playing, if you like, to the US domestic audience and those voters he's got to convince?
Well, he said if they don't pay their fair share. I mean, he made an issue of the fact that a lot of the NATO countries were not spending 2% of their GDP on their own national defense and contributing to NATO. And by the way, there was a session where among NATO allies where it got a lot of press at the time when Donald Trump was president, that he made a case of they need to pay their fair share if the alliance is going to work. And a lot of the Eastern European countries do now, particularly Poland does. A lot of the former Soviet satellite countries that, were, taken up by the Iron Curtain, they do now because they see that threat as real. But Donald Trump made that clear. And the week after, I do polling in Europe in a lot of democracies over there. And after Donald Trump had that meeting in private with leaders of those NATO countries, I had two different prime ministers tell me who my clients that I polled for told me exactly what happened. And he was saying, you need to pay your fair share. And that is a very popular concept with the United States, American public opinion. It's a very popular concept with particularly Trump supporters, but it's only fair. I mean, the United States should not be required to, fund what we're funding to pay the war in Ukraine. And by the way,
let me ask you, because we haven't got a huge amount of time, John, and I wanted to ask you about President Biden and the concerns that have been raised about his age, in particular after that devastating report at the weekend that suggested he couldn't remember when he was vice president, that he couldn't actually remember the date that his son died, something that he has very angrily rejected. How do you think that is playing? Do you think there are real concerns amongst voters about the president's age?
Oh, there's definitely concerns because also we did a survey of battleground state polls that's published on our website for Euronews, and 82% of all voters said that's a weak point for Joe Biden is his health and mental fitness. And right behind it was his open border illegal immigration policy at 79%, his handling of inflation and prices at 76%. So it's a significant concern. But I'll tell you, that press conference, it took it goes back to my original point. It took all the media attention away from his most vulnerable point. He is a corrupt president. He is prosecuting his opponent on laws that in that 388-page report, the special counsel exonerated him from his violations of the Confidentiality Act and said he was too old to testify. Well, that's a huge double standard because he was not president when he had these documents. He was a U.S. senator or his vice president. He does not have the right to declassify documents. And he was in the possession of confidential documents, national security documents, and they were in his office at the Penn Biden Center that China gave tens of millions of dollars to, and that the
Yeah, but that
U.S.
court judgment drew a difference between Joe Biden, which it said had cooperated with the authorities investigating this, and Donald Trump, who had not cooperated in the same way when he faced accusations of taking documents out of the White House without permission.
But he's the president. He was the former president. Joe Biden was not president. There is a major conflict of interest, and because that special counsel was appointed by Merrick Garland, Joe Biden's attorney general, the same attorney general who appointed the counsel to prosecute Donald Trump on these laws. The Biden campaign exists to convict Donald Trump on laws to stop him from winning this election. That's their political campaign strategy. It's a very bad strategy and a very bad precedent in the United States because you cannot name one person who's been convicted under these laws before. There's laws that he's facing 91 counts, hundreds of years in jail based on Civil War laws. They tried to knock us off the ballots in
Okay,
states.
well, let me just ask you finally, because we're almost out of time, John,
Yeah.
but do you think that as things stand, we're looking at what is likely to be a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Trump is apparently ahead in the national polls, but also in
Yeah.
those important swing states. Do you think we are on course for another Trump presidency?
Absolutely, because right now Joe Biden's the only major candidate filed for the delegates in his party. He's going to have all those delegates. He's also pushing these prosecutions for a reason. And Donald Trump has won the primaries in effect. We're going to win in South Carolina. As we went on the air today, CBS News has Donald Trump over Nikki Haley 65-30 in her home state. So we've locked up. He's the de facto nominee. So we're headed for a rematch of 2020, except this time Donald Trump is in the lead because there is a 2020 Biden voter that has now flipped to Donald Trump because of high inflation. The country's on the wrong track. They can't stop these endless wars, whether it's Ukraine or the Middle East. The border's open and crime is on the rise. So the United States, the voters are not being fooled by this. And right now, if the election was tomorrow, Donald Trump would be president, but it's not. We got to wait till November 5th.
John McLaughlin, Donald Trump's pollster. Really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for the opportunity.